This is the Parents in Sport podcast. Amazing guests, honest conversations, topics that matter.
Welcome to the Parents in Sport podcast. I am your host, Gordon MacLelland, and I'm delighted to be joined today by former Great Britain track and field legend and current BBC Sports presenter, Denise Lewis. Denise, thank you for joining us on the show.
Looking forward to speaking with you. It's such a fantastic area to be talking about, so I'm really excited. Fantastic.
Now, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about sports parenting. But how's parenting been in general, Denise, in the current situation that we find ourselves in?
I'd say there's been a lot of highs and I would say a lot of positives, but the lows have been so frustrating at times. I've got 4 children, one of which is a baby, and I've got an 18-year-old daughter, so she's been pretty self-sufficient. Unfortunately, she's part of the crop that will sit no exams. She won't sit no exams for her A-levels, so she's going to be waiting just to see if she gets in her uni place. But she's been really good. But it's the 2 middle ones that have been causing me some distress at times because obviously they're used to being at very sporty schools, and so it's been important for me to keep the momentum going for them. As boys, they've got a lot of energy. They need to be outside, burning that off. But more specifically, my 14-year-old son plays football. He's at an academy. And so there's a lot of training that I do need to make sure that he's not missing out on. So I put on that hat. My husband and I have divided the attention. I take on him, he takes on the kids, and just keep him these new skills that I don't think he actually has been using.
Okay, fantastic. And we're both in the same boat there because my son's in a football academy as well. And I've had to resort to deciding that I need to be the role model and join in, and I've had to get out there. And I do have to say that horrible smell of cut grass and the thought of doing interval training and sprint sessions, which I thought I'd parked 20 years ago, hasn't been that much fun, but at least I've got out there and attempted to do it.
I'm smiling because I'm actually nursing a hamstring injury because I've been doing exactly the same thing. We've been out in the local park and been doing shuttle runs, some back-to-backs. And at times when I think he's lagged, I join in and really try and up the ante. And unfortunately, some days I feel really good, but on this occasion, I managed to pull my hamstring a little bit. And that was just the alarm bell. It's like, Denise, you need to stop this. This is not good. Instruct from the side, give him a time, but do not join in.
Yeah, and I think you're right there because we just sort of think that our bodies are just going to cope with it. And why, I've had little tears and it's like, well, what do you expect? You haven't done anything this explosive for 15 years. And did you just expect it to sort of happen? So it's been interesting. I did like something you said to me off the interview about how you don't really carry that much credibility in your house. We all know you as the amazing athlete, but where's your status in the household from a sporting point of view?
I keep getting challenged very much so. My status is low. Put it that way. It's low. It's that, yeah, Mom, you used to do this in the olden days. Mom, you were really quick back in, but now, we're in our teens and we think we can take you down. So I'm constantly having to prove myself, whether it's physically strength or I try and let them see me doing push-ups and I try and, just make sure they realize that I still do have areas of expertise and I still have a lot of skills. I accept that one day the pathway is going to cross over and the boys are just going to, just show their potential and make me look like I'm an ex-athlete, basically. But
Fantastic.
But like you, I still want to hold on to that role model status for a little while longer.
Yeah, I'm the same. Luckily, I've got, unfortunately, well, I don't know if it's a good thing. I've got a few more years than you, so mine are 10 and 8, which means I've probably got a few more years to churn that out for. So, I'm hoping that we can all get out of lockdown and that they can go back to the people who are actually training them so that I don't necessarily have to do every session. But I've been trying to do the whole house. So I've taken my son out who has his football training, as you say, and I've taken out my 8-year-old daughter because I've been desperate to get her. And we started Couch to 5K, and we've got her to 5K, and she absolutely loved that. And then I even have to exercise my wife, who doesn't find it particularly easy. And so I've been getting her out, but unfortunately that means I don't get a day off. So it's been quite hard work, really. But I think I've enjoyed it by the fact I'm telling you the tale.
Well, I think there is a lot, as I said at the beginning, there's been a lot of positives to lockdown, and we are inherently as quite a sporty family. We do enjoy the outdoors. And so I think for me, it has been an opportunity to re-engage. And I know we're joking aside, but there is a seriousness for me trying to show my son what it takes if you are involved in sport and have aspirations to take it to a different level. So I have tried to make it fun, because that's a really important element to anything that you're doing, but particularly in sport, where a lot of the work can be repetitive, it can be hard, very technical. And so I've tried to find fun aspects of introducing, and for him to get to know his body, and, highlight where things might be a little challenging for him and why, and how you overcome those things. And so that's when I really have, the Olympic hat on again, the athlete that has gone through these things, to try and just drop these little pearls of wisdom into his mindset. And hopefully he can run with that. But again, I think there's a danger when you, and I know this to be true, as I said, he plays football. There's a danger that you can overload information that they're just not ready to receive or utilize when they're in their early teens. So information and processing, you've got to get it right, I think, as a parent who is taking on that role as a coach, if you like.
Yeah, and I think we forget sometimes, don't we, that they are still children. I feel that even watching my son now, when they put on the football kit like you see every week, and they look like the mini version of what we perceive on the telly or what we see on the TV, and then we actually think, no, you are just 10 or you are just 13 or 14. And as you say, the language that we use, we don't want them to grow up too quickly. We want everybody in sport because it's fun. And as you say, we've almost got to be clever in how we hide what they're doing if we can.
Yeah. And think of how I was at 14. I have to really do that often. Just how were you? You were still learning. You were still in your infancy. And because we do know so much more with our experiences, we want the best for our children, but sometimes we do expect them to be at an accelerated place. And I do have to put the handbrake on every now and again. And that's okay for them to have a little bit of junk food, or not to be hitting the 5 a day or 7 a day in terms of their nutrition. And it's understanding that it's a building block, and making sure that nothing is excessive one way or the other. And you keep them in that sort of nice, even keel, that even space where they're learning to fail, they're learning their own mistakes, and they're learning also, and this is the big element for me, which I hope my son's going to get by the time he goes back to school, whenever that might be, that he can do more. That's been our strapline. You can do more than you think. And I hope that resonates with him.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things you've touched on there. Certainly in our work with parents, is that there's no such thing as being a perfect parent, and there's no such thing as being a perfect sports parent. But actually, just chill out, because everybody that you speak to or listen to will tell you that they've made some horrible mistakes, and all we're trying to do is work out as we go along, try and help each other to give our children, I guess those best possible sporting experiences that we can. But there's certainly no magic wand, and certainly at this time, perfection certainly has to go out the window, and whatever you get done, don't you?
Yeah, and I think I don't know if it's different depending on where, the experiences of the parent. Obviously, I know I've met the highest level, but I do think there's a sense that, because obviously I hear a lot of parents on the sidelines, and I'm sometimes horrified by the things I hear shouted out. on the sidelines, or when my son was playing tennis during the matches. It's just awful. And I think sometimes it's parents that are willing their children to be so much better, or even replacing, a bit of their own aspirations or things that didn't quite go well for them in their sporting experience, and imparting that on their children. And I think it's a very difficult line. It's a boundary that parents need to understand about themselves, that sometimes saying less is better than saying too much, and conflicting information if you are the parent on the sidelines and the other coach is giving instructions, that you have to learn to bite your tongue a little bit.
Yeah.
And pick your time when you're going to deliver that information to your child. Sometimes post-match isn't the best time to have a conversation about or analyze a performance. It might be, over dinner in a bit more of an informal setting, or out for a walk with the dog.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those timing of those conversations are really important. I think the thing that I found is, as you say, parents will do what they do because they want what's best for the children, and they clearly love the children. We know that. The trouble is that we also probably know between us that in terms of sporting development, lots of the things that we may naturally do as a parent, probably in the sporting world, don't actually help our children. So those moments when we jump in to protect and thing, we know you mentioned earlier that actually, but we also need our children to be comfortable with failure. So we have to allow them to fail. It isn't really failure, but it's just part of them learning and developing. I think on the sidelines, I think parents want to be seen like they're supporting. And I think that if somebody else shouts more, sometimes they shout even more so that their child feels like they're getting as much support as somebody else. And certainly what we found with this work is actually a lot of those things about being comfortable with failure and understanding how negative it is to yell those tactical instructions. Lots of parents with no sporting background don't really know that. We're talking about it quite openly because we've obviously got some kind of sporting background behind us, but lots of them are just perceiving sport how they see it on TV, or how society perceives sport, and very much joining into the environments that they find themselves in. I often say to parents, if you go to Wimbledon, no one's shouting during the serve. We go and watch golf at a tournament and somebody's over a putt. There's no one screaming out apart from the odd one in the Ryder Cup. But when we sometimes hit some local football, or we hit grassroots football, and everybody's sort of doing it, it's like the parents conform because we all want to conform as human nature. So actually, is that responsibility more on not necessarily the coaches, but the organisations to get that information out there in everybody's best interest?
I think it is. And I think you hit a totally valid point. I was coached for over 20 years, to understand myself and the environment I'm in. And you're right, parents walk in, they've got a sporty child, or a child that really enjoys sport and wants to be involved. And yeah, they're drawn into the environment, as you said. And so, yes, I do think it's down to the organisations to maybe deliver, a program or somewhere like your organisation does provide information for parents to access. Because I'm sure deep down, parents know when actually maybe I've said too much. You only have to look at your child's face and think, might have not got the tone right there. And they'd like an opportunity to be able to learn how to coach or to support better. I think that's crucial, and it's probably not done enough, I think, whether it's at school level or, as you said, in a professional club situation.
Yeah, and I think that the difficulty with the whole parental engagement piece and getting parents on board is that much of the work that's been done in this field in the past is very much, you go over there, you've been naughty, stand behind that line, don't shout at an official, don't do this, don't do that. And actually, well, hang on, forget the don'ts for a minute. How about some of the positive things that we can do and actually bring them more into the process. And as you say, that even the timing of those conversations and the car journey home, and you know what, I have a slide in our workshops about the car journey home and show a video, and it's my big nemesis, the car journey home. I've had some absolute shockers over the years. So even living and breathing this, it still counts for nothing, because every now and then when human emotion kicks in, everything that you think you should be doing, everything you know, goes out of the window. And that's somebody who's living and breathing it. So people who get the child after the game and take them back to the car, we've all seen it, where the regurgitating match of the day from the night before, and you're getting the biggest grilling that you've ever had, and you just want to have a game of football if you're the child.
Yeah, and you know, I know my husband's done it. I've sat in the car, and because I don't want us to be having a ding dong, for better use of that terminology, in front of our son, I let him say his piece, and you know, and I talk to my husband afterwards, and he'll say, actually, I probably shouldn't have said that. And I think, you know, and I don't know within your experience that some sports are better than others at managing that expectation. But definitely, as I said earlier, having that beat before you speak, or trying to take the emotion out of it, finding the right time is probably key and very useful. And again, if there's both parents involved in the car journey, I think sometimes there can be a two-pronged attack, you know, on that particular child. Let the child speak. I said sometimes we're not very good at letting our children speak and find that emotion and asking the whys and the how. How did that make you feel? Which I'm trying to get better at, instead of talking, you know, at my son or my daughter, just letting them, you know, examine that emotion and that feeling and let it come out.
Yeah, and it's difficult for us as parents, because we were almost sort of programmed to do that. And we encourage parents, you know, when they are in the car on the journey home, that you need to find something that works for you in your context, because everybody's different, but very much based around this idea that if we do really need to talk, then we need to ask open questions, like you say, that get some response for how our children feel about the sporting experience, not our opinion of what we've just witnessed, which was certainly some of the things that I did in the early days and have got better at. But again, we're talking about this and having those moments to reflect about what a really positive car journey could look like. And I think lots of people have never even thought that it's a danger area, yet it's probably one of the biggest collision courses out there in the sports parenting world.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only reason I understand this, and I'll keep drawing back to my own experiences as an athlete, competing at the Olympics or at the major championships, things are going well, things are not going well. And particularly if things aren't going well, you need that time to ingest what has happened to you and what the true emotions are, because initially it could be just upset, which turns to rage. The coach also has to learn, when are you most likely to deliver that information? And as an adult, you can communicate that. Children are probably more reluctant to say anything, but it's learning the skills, like you said. It's just understanding your child, reading the situation, and not descending that attack, criticizing the coach, criticizing the other teammates if you can help it, which, you know, I have heard some parents do.
Yeah, and I think, again, when we talk about what really positive sports parenting looks like, if it's all gone wrong, in our need to protect, which we do as parents, we're likely to come up with the excuses, aren't we? It's almost like we make the excuses for the parent. Well, if only the referee hadn't done that, or only if your teammate had done this for you, or if only this had happened. When actually, okay, it's gone wrong, it hasn't worked, we've lost, or it's failed, it hasn't gone according to plan. And actually, there needs to be that grieving process that you talked about, where their emotions come out. And actually, silence is okay, because as adults, we're desperate to fill the silence, either because we've got something to say, or we want our children just to feel better about what's just happened.
Yeah. I mean, As I said, it's very much punishment of oneself. And no, you're not always going to get it right. So, I do encourage parents, don't beat yourself up, but it's such an important area for your child's relationship with their sport going forward, and the communication with their teammates. If you learn the right way in how to conduct or self-analyze a performance, it's key. Getting the children to talk openly, matter of factly about that emotion at that moment in time, or picking one or two elements out of the performance. And even the car journey, we're talking a lot about the car journey away from the performance, but what about the car journey to the performance? That is I think, as equally as important.
Yeah.
With your children.
What do you do, Denise? What do you do? What's your plan for the car journey, to the game, or to athlete, or wherever you're going? What do you have a set plan? Do you talk about it lots, or do you try to not talk about it?
No, I try to ask my son whether he's been given any indications what his one or two things that he needs to adopt in the game. What is his plan? What's his role? What are the two key elements to his to what he's about to do? And after that, if he can remember them and articulate them, just before he gets out of the car, I'll ask him again, remember what you're doing? Yep. Have a good game.
Yeah.
Do your best. So I don't try and bombard my son with information at that point. Again, I know it's tempting for parents just to overload, impart what they think they've seen in the last game or what they've witnessed in training. If you did that, it's very confusing for them. It's too much information. They cannot process it. And what you may get as a result is someone that is totally switched off. And therefore performance is going to be probably a bit below par. Again, not the same for everybody. Some children might need that G'ing up beforehand. So you've got to work out the character, the temperament of your child. My son is pretty laid back, and so he does need those buzzwords. He does need to maybe watch an image of those in his position and see how they've handled a particular move that he's trying to perfect, and you drop that in. Be like Oxford Chamberlain. Do that. Do that run. Remember that run. Try and see how you get on with it. I also told them to have no fear. I was like, this is all a learning curve. You're still learning.
Yeah, express yourself, isn't it? Is absolutely key. And don't worry about the negative sides. Just go for it and back yourself. I think we've probably got to be aware as parents as well that our children naturally want to please us anyway and please the coaches. So that period going to a game, they're probably already nervous in just trying to do that. And as you say, if we bombard them and overload them and say that it's a big game and sort of ramp up the pressure, we go over that sort of tipping point of, oh, well, actually, they're going to get out of the car and have a really sort of optimum performance, to the point where actually they've got out of the car and they're terrified to do anything and they end up almost freezing. I said to my son towards just before the outbreak, and he was playing away to Manchester City, and we do lots together. I said, "Oh, big game today, Archie," and he said, "Well, not really, Dad. It's just another game." And I thought, I cannot believe you do this like I do and live and breathe it. And probably didn't need to say that, but I was quite excited because we'd been everywhere else and I hadn't been to Manchester City. And I was so impressed by his response, attitude, and he played like that. He could have been playing like it was at the local pub. Didn't faze him in any way whatsoever. And actually, that's what we're ultimately trying to get towards, isn't it? That we're just managing those experiences.
That's a brilliant response. I mean, what maturity? That's fantastic. That's really great when you hear a child that can just express themselves and then deliver. I think it's all we want to do, as I said, is have our children enjoy the sport that they're involved with. You know as well as I do, academy life is very challenging. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Coping with the releasing of your child at any stage of that pathway, particularly challenging for the child, even though I see some parents in tears more than the child in those instances. But you want most of the sports that they can continue well into their adult life. And I think that if their experiences are negative or too traumatic or not enough fun, they feel that their parents are putting too much pressure on them, you do run the risk of perhaps not having, that longevity in the sport. The key things that I try to impart, and rest is important. I try to make sure my children rest well in the weeks leading up to a game. I monitor the other sports that they're involved, which I'm pleased that my kids do have quite a rounded sports program at school.
Can I just jump in there, Denise? Because actually you've raised, I think, a really good point for anybody that's listening to this. Although Denise's got a son in a football academy, as I have, that my children play 5, 6, 7 sports. Not as relentlessly as maybe football, but certainly haven't gone down the line of, in order to be any good, all we have to do is one thing. There's so many things that can be learned by bringing all the other things into that one sport, when you may decide to finally say, that's the one that I'm sort of going to carry through with.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a big advocate of trying as much as you can physically fit in your week with your children. Usually the parents are more burnt out than they are because they have quite an abundance of energy in their young years. But, experiencing different social groups, it's testing the body in different ways, whether it's gymnastics and football, whatever the combinations might be. I think it's important that children do not specialize too soon. I think there are some great early adopters, obviously gymnastics being one of them. Dance for girls and boys. I think it's all very important, but there is a time later on when you can decide that actually this is the one I like, this is the sport that really makes me feel alive, and I can then take it to wherever my destiny will allow it. But it's important, I believe, that children do try and do as much as they can as in their young and formative years, because it really does give a more rounded individual, both mentally and physically.
Yeah, and without the information, it's parents are just following sort of through logic in many ways, aren't they? They sort of hear things like the 10,000 hour myth, and they hear things, well, to do one thing, we must do it. And then, of course, we get the Williams sisters and we get the Tiger Woods model. So we get those models that everybody jumps onto as a reason for doing it that way. Yet we haven't seen the millions that have ended up in a car crash attempting the same kind of model. But for most grassroots parents or people out there, without the sporting background, you are just going to assume that the more you do, the better you'll be. And you are going to assume that if you drive it even more, that is going to guarantee you success. And actually, we know that is so not the case. And we don't want parents to throw their eggs into one basket, that the children end up being a commodity almost that they're expecting a return from.
Yeah, the adage there is more is definitely not more in the long run. It really isn't. Again, their bodies changing, forever changing and developing, and you've got to be mindful that you're not hampering their physical development and overuse injuries. Yes, you want the kids outside playing, and I think that's good for their minds. But when it becomes too structured too soon, it's just like there's that burnout that we talk about that comes later in life, that it's just not fun anymore. And so you've got to get the balance right, and that's why a varied sport is good, because I just think it gives you a bit more, just makes it a bit more fun, and that's what you want at this stage. I mean, if I look back at my career, I used to dance, from the age of 3. My mom was definitely, she's got to dance. I wanted to, I was only with siblings at a social group, so dancing was the easiest one to get to. I danced, I did athletics. By the time I was 14, I couldn't fit in both because I had shows and competitions clashing all the time at the weekends. And so I had to pick one. But I was having fun. My early coaches made the sessions fun. That's why I wanted to go back every single week. Once it starts to become too much like a chore, too much like a job for a young person, that's a warning sign. Where they're not asking you to take your child to a certain venue. When they are tired, they're not catching up, they feel like it's all too much. That's when you might have overcooked it a bit.
Yeah, and we need to check in with them. Ultimately, the easiest way of doing that is to have a conversation with them. I think we sometimes neglect, maybe how they feel and how they express themselves, and we need to ask, why sometimes why are you playing? I tried this the other week with mine, and I think I got, I quite like the challenge, but I like being with my friends. And my little girl said, because it's fun, and I'm with my friends. And it was no more complicated than that. But I'm guessing if you asked your son in their teenage years and they're a little bit further down that sporting journey, those responses may be slightly different, but at least we know what they are. We can best support them if we know why they're doing it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message to get out there, that it's not your journey as a parent, it is your child's journey and relationship with the sport. So those questions are really key. And also, I think it's really hard to know, and I know this for when Ryan was playing tennis, as my son I'm talking about, it was almost as if, we wanted him to play tennis, and he kind of enjoyed it, but wasn't really into it. And we kept doing this crazy journey to try and get him there. And we went to him one day and said, do you actually like this? Do you want to play? It's like, yeah, but, I'm a bit tired at the end of the day, because it's quite a long journey. And, by the time we got back, he still had to do homework as well. So we're like, okay, let's leave it. It's fine. You can play locally. We're always looking for the best coaches. And I think that was my philosophy. If you find the best person to work with, the person that understands, how to make these technical changes and makes it fun for the child, we're prepared to drive that little bit further. And that in itself is a good thing, as long as it's not at the detriment to everything else that's going on in your child's life at that point as well. But yeah, asking the right questions at the right times, it will give you better information on how to deal with your child and their development, whether they're having fun, whether they have serious aspirations in the sport, whether it's just a social exercise for them. But always be sure that they're not just doing it for your approval and to keep you happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Sort of golden information there from Denise. Now, do you think over the years, obviously you transitioned out of athletics and then you became Denise the mum, and you obviously had some kind of not preset plan, but you obviously had your own thoughts about how the sports parenting journey would pan out. Have you changed your approach and your thoughts over the years, having lived and gone through it all? Anything that you've specifically changed that you maybe went in at the beginning with perhaps in the wrong way?
Yes, absolutely. My daughter I talked about is 18, and she was born, let's say, at the height of my career, really. And as she grew up, she got used to people saying, you must be really sporty because your mum's sporty. No, you're going to be an athlete because your mum's an athlete. And it actually wore her down. She's just like, no, I'm not. I enjoy watching, but I don't really have any competitive aspirations at all. And I remember one day she said to me, we were having this conversation about, pushing yourself a bit more, trying to do a bit more. And this was, I think, in the context of not only sport, but also in her education. And she said to me, well, Mum, what's wrong with being mediocre? I had to catch my breath. But then I had thought, whatever I say next could either break this individual, and it's my child. So I need to think very carefully about what my response is going to be now. And I said, actually, for some people, mediocre is okay. And I've had to treat her a little bit differently, because I think she had this real aversion to trying to be competitive, because she always thought she was going to fail, because she was never going to be as good as I was. And so I have had to modify my expectations of the children that environment has a lot to play in my development, as an individual. They have, I would say, life a little bit easier. And so we don't always see the competitiveness. And so I've had to tone it down a lot as a parent, and just guide them. Even sports day, I have a lot of parents shouting away, and my children have been the target, all the way through their school lives. Got to beat that one, got to beat this one, and I just say, guys, just do your best. There is no pressure for you to perform. It has to come from within, and it has to come from those individuals. So I've learned just to modify what I'm saying, how I'm saying it. I don't know whether I'm successful yet, because it can be incredibly frustrating, because especially when you have a child that's talented, and I do have a very talented one, but he's just super laid back.
Yeah.
And so I've got to let him be. Yeah. That is okay. That is okay, she says, biting her knuckles. But it has to be. It's not my journey. I've got what I've achieved, what I needed to, because of my own ambitions. I am and was very competitive, even at the age of 8. And I think for parents that do have super competitive children, I think it's keep nurturing that competitiveness. As long as they learn to manage the disappointments that will come their way, and having the right conversation to have with that individual when those things happen, because they will.
Yeah, absolutely.
They will happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Some amazing messages there. I'm just looking and conscious of the time as we approach the end of this episode. So, Denise, final question. Denise's 3 top tips, please, for any new or current sports parents. What would you say to them based on what you have learned as an athlete and now as a mum?
Wow. I'd say the top tips would be, let it be your child's ambitions. Let your children dictate where they're going, what they want to get out of the sport. Try to remember, when you're speaking to your young person, less is more. Less conversation is more for them mentally in the long run. And make it fun.
Yeah, I'll put you on the spot.
You have.
Yeah.
I think it's make it fun. I mean, it's better for both of you and your experiences in sport, if you try to have fun where possible, and not to be so strict. So I was going to say, I can't. Oh, there's so much more I want to say.
You've got your 3, Denise. That was all you were allowed. You're only allowed 3.
Okay.
Denise, thank you so much for joining us on the Parent in Sport podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait for this episode to get out at the end of June in the public domain. Thank you so much for giving up your time.
Thanks, Gordon.
Thank you for listening. Check us out at parentsinsport.co.uk.